pay attention to the computers, bugs, and all that, because each year is the same problem, disappear. No? Don't be confident that inside is not, because inside they disappear. If you go outside, don't leave the bugs in the place, because we have a lot of problems in other congresses. Because this is the Congress number 8 each year, but makes a lot of experience of that. Ben, the head of the Association of Architects here today is not coming. He says that it's impossible. All the politicians in Catalonia have hundreds of meetings. You will guess why, no? You know the process of independence, and it's in a very critical moment here. Then everybody's with meetings and other kind of things. No? The head of the colegio, the head of the school, the head of the university, and he decided to come in Friday, the last day. There is the structure of the Congress is the same, mainly of other years. There is a new activity that is the signature of books at 7:30 in the p.m. in the school, the books by Richard Fernand, my own last books by other professors of the. We try to present some books and to make the typical relations of signature of books if somebody is interested to have the books. This is today and tomorrow at 7:30. Is the only change in the normal schedule. As each year at 3 o'clock we start the sessions in the School of Architecture, and it's important to be there. The people that has today the session. Today more or less is 30 people that has the session today, 30 people tomorrow, and 30 people Friday, something like that. It's 100 participation communications for 20 different countries that are related to the architectonics network. As always, the final party is at 8 p.m. in Friday. That is the last thing. And then next week, the intensive course starts in Tuesday, because Monday is holiday in Barcelona. That's one thing that you should know. Everything is closed. The university is closed, everything closed in Monday. Okay, this is some practical questions. Now we will start with the first lecture. You know that this network is organized through 3 different axes: education, architecture, and social interaction in space. That means mind, land, and society, or the mental dimension of space, the physical dimension of space, and the social dimension of space. You can take in very different ways, but it's the same at the end. Not to isolate education from architectural design, from social participation of urban planning, not make a barrier between architecture and urban planning, and not to make a barrier between education and profession. This is the general guidelines always in the review, in the international magazine, and in the congresses. Then today we have is education from very different views. In this case, 2 very different views. Isabel Marcos, that from Lisbon, then takes different, you will see, different views, the analysis of the architectural form from a cultural point of view and from a semiotic frame, and Luis Saula, that is related from a long time with the Child Environmental Center in New York, and now is in Boulder, and is making a nice relation between education, social planning, and social interaction in space. That is not very usual to have these kind of examples, that all the cities in the world, they want to do that, but then a lot of them, they don't arrive to the practical, real connection, no? To connect the children education with social planning, with architectural design. Connect these three things through a real settings. That is, in the sense, then both are related to the key aspect of this Congress, that is not education by itself, it's education in relation to architecture, social planning, and the human dimension of space. It's not education as some kind of didactic autonomy that we are very critical to make the discussion in the School of Architecture, that everything is reduced to didactic laws without context, no? And then we are very angry with that all the time. And the students now in the School of Architecture, I should advise, the last thing I can say to you, that there is a fight between the professors in the school and the students. And you will see the students are sleeping there. They take the space. Then we will have the Congress in between a battle between generations. No? They are very critical about the way the School of Architecture is teaching, and then decided to take the space and, as a protest. And they are very critical, not for political, ideological things, but for the freedom of the mind. No? They want to have a free mind. And they say that the school is trying to control the thinking, making one kind of architecture only. And they say there are several kinds of architecture. Well, it's a very, it takes 3 months now. We'll see the students in the middle of the hall. Then, Isabel Marcos, we know from a long time ago, because I have been president of the International Association of Semiotics of Space during a lot of years, and then she has been very active in the way of theory of architecture and analysis of the form from very different perspectives. And one of them, semiotics, was also from social science and the connection in Portugal between architects and social scientists. That is not very usual, that they say that in Portugal exists this connection. Not in general, but yes, in specific places. And this is a very good background for this kind of things that we will also talk on Friday. But now, from the educative viewpoint of analysis of the meaning of the forms, you begin to see the connection between architecture and social science. I'm glad that you accept to come, Isabel.
Thank you very much about this invitation. And today I will speak about different scales of the conception of a project, Salpêtrière quarter, district. And I will include in this analysis the different processes of decision and the different actors that participate in this project. And myself, I participate as a consultant in this during 20 years, more than 20 years, in this project. Then it is quite, it's something that, and I work also with Jean Nouvel and Dutiol in this specific project. Then the quarter is here. This part. You see here the ring of Paris, the périphérique, and the project is here. this is the ancient hall of the farmers, where there was where you pay taxes to enter to Paris. Then the district of Salpêtrière. Then I have to. It's quite difficult to look at images and. Okay. Then the Salpêtrière quarter is, as we can see in the picture, one of the districts that compose the operation of development of Paris Rive Gauche. As we see here, this is the district that we will analyzing, but it's composed also by the National Library and the University of Masséna, and this is a very strange part, and I will speak about this problem of relation between the peripheric and Ivry and the other cities around this project. This operation born of the lake of relationship between the city of Paris with other towns in and its neighborhood environment. It must be known that the municipality of Paris was constituted by the 30th century. All around the history of Paris, this city was positioned itself at the national level, represent France. Then, due to the successive divisions and subdivisions, into a smaller and smaller municipalities. It represents only 2 million of inhabitants, excluding Parisians with, outside the walls. The Greater Paris project that was the subject of a great international context, making important architects and multidisciplinarity teams intervene, seeks precisely to respond to the absence of definition of a metropolitan region of Paris. In the 1991, a convention between Municipality of Paris, local dimension, and the French railways, global dimension, enables to launching the Paris Left Bank urban operation. All this part. Oops. Ah no, là. The project of the quartier Salpêtrière results at least of as many political administrative decisions as the mobilization around by the tasks of understanding subject dynamics of urban forms. In order to understand its dynamics, in the case of this district, I look to articulate the diverse scales and boundaries that support the local and global integration of this district. Hereby the plan of my Metropolitan Paris of region of the Great Paris, the morphogenesis of the quarter. This is the program that I will speak about, the semiogenesis of this quarter, and the controversies engendered by Nouvelle and Dutiol. And if I have time, decision-making politics of this region development project. The first point, then. Along this first point, we shall observe through a rhetorical analysis of the image of the Greater Paris, projected by Jean Nouvel and Dutiol, exposed in the book, in this book, Birth and Rebirths of 1001 Parisian Joys. They say this is a synthesis of their Paris at the metropolitan scale. They define it as this book is not an utopia, but a political answer to a political question. This book, donc, what kind of Heger on Paris, an architect for architecturing Paris, a manifest for Paris, another language for another Paris, a founding book for another urban model, a new strategic language for the Paris of 2050. All along the first point, I will try to respond to a discourse, the discursive statue of this work by putting forward the analytic hypothesis according to which this book is a rhetorical of image of the greater Paris, of Jean Nouvel and Dutilleul, in the sense that, in one hand, the image of Nouvel and Dutilleul project is composed by a strategy of image that functions as arguments aiming to obtain the adhesion of a receiver, the inhabitants. On the other hand, the project seems to arise as a system of language of these architects. And it's important to understand the language of these architects to understand after the choices that they do about Salpêtrière. Following a request by the President of the Republic, the municipality of Paris has proposed to a multidisciplinarity teams to reflect and, if possible, formulate propositions, solutions for changing the development and make it becomes on a greater international metropolis. The history after is that, unfortunately, those projects becomes only a transportation project. That's the problem. But I think it's interesting to see the idea of these two persons about this metropolitan Paris. 10 projects have seen the light of the day, starting from the request under the form of exhibition and the book entitled The Grand Paris, The Greater Paris. Its projects are propositions to be submitted to a democratic decision. And I laugh because was not very democratic, because the president decides to make other thing. Then a lot of very important architects work for a year for nothing. Then we have chosen to analyze the rhetoric image of these propositions with the project of Jean Nouvel, Birth and Rebirth of 1001 Parisian Joys. Here is why they summarized it. This book is not an utopia, but a political answer to a political question. It describes a strategy of ambitious social transformation, realistic, clear. It is a nature to be applicable to the essential of the territory and to interest each commune of Paris M. Paris M, it's also Paris Metropolis, but also Paris Aimé, from Aimé, loves. To the image of Paris La Défense, Paris La Courneuve, Paris Gennevilliers, a strategy of a high level of historical and ecological challenge of this beginning of century. Here is the development. Here is the deployment of our hypothesis of analysis. If we consider the Great Paris of Jean Nouvel and Dutilleul as a discourse of the space of urbanity, we can see emerging progressively from this discourse two oppositions, figure of urbanizing and architecture. I don't know how to translate. I put architecturating. These figures of rhetoric produce a transformation to values that they carry, in the sense whereby we understand these concepts in semiotics difference that support transformations. The second point, the synthetic generation of urbanization and architecturating figures operated on small numbers of categories and or paradigms. This inventory of which becomes clear through our work, and or of which of the Manifesto of Lausanne constitutes, which we could agree call rhetoric dimension of the discourse of this time novel. This point 3 categories could be generalized and considered the categories of architectonic praxis. The sensitive rules is the proposition of Dutiol and Nouvelle, opposed by insensitive urbanism. The rhetoric of image of the Great Paris project of Nouvelle and Dutiol arise as an art of the discourse to distribute, to dissuade the receptor, the evident, the politician, the urbanist, that there must be an urgent transfer towards sustainable development. Nouvelle and Dutiol underline that the political question posed is also more so political than the beginning of this century is marked by a menace due to the large part of the bad management of our urban hypertrophies and our industrial territories. There is a threat for our health and the future of our planet. International agreements are signed and inciting the change of direction. Our children, quite rightly, would not forgive us to not honoring them. That was a citation of Nouvelle. Confronted with the urgence and fact with several types of crisis, the architect creates now sensitive rules. It is time to inventory new relations, new links, new mobility, renewable energies, and the new morphologies in the math of nature introduced in all levels. In quite an architectural tradition, Jean Nouvel delivers us a manifesto of Louisiana, and this time applied to the territory of Paris M. We proposed to all Parisians a new link with nature. The argumentative challenge put by Nouvelle and Dutiol in the presentation of sensitive rules, in the name of the pleasure, this is another citation of his work, in the name of the pleasure of living in this earth, it is necessary to fight against urbanism of zones, of networks, of shop-up territories, against the automatic decay that cancels out the identity of towns of all continents under the climate that fits on clun office, on clun housing, on clun business, treating after pre-true ups, preview to avoiding thinking and seeing. These must be set up rules that are sensitive, poetical, and orientations that speak of colors, of species, of characters, of anomalies to be created, and very specific links to the rain, to the wind, to the sea, to the mountains. Rules that will speak about temporal and spatial continuum, that will orient a mutation, a modification of initial chaos, and that will take interest in all of fractal levels of our towns. This rhetorical dimension of the discourse of Nouvelle Industrielle starts in the point A, a political question asked by the President of the Republic, and terminates in the point B, answer given by Nouvelle, a manifest of Louisiana applied to Paris Hem. His argumentation consists to progressively extracting from the opposition between its sensitive rules and the urbanism of zones, insensitive and institute, to another architectural praxis. He invites us to change our way of doing urbanism. And he proposed, along the work, the development of these oppositions will have recourse to mediations. These are some ideas of this new way of architecturating. These rules introduce a new logical and seeing of thinking territories and lives. The sensitive rules will be explained progressively and through the work. Vegetal invades, infiltrates towns, principles of requalification of existing buildings, looking Paris in a different way, architecture revisited by nature and techniques, Francilian towers, as we can see, as we can see here. Then premeditation of horizons. Yes, okay. These sensitive rules are linked to a common vocabulary in order to stop multi-ignorance between beings and things. For the drawing of shared active happy identity and prolonging in Parisian Jules and his geography. To achieve this aim, the proposal of Nouvelle Industrielle enumerates nine measures of transformation of the city. There are of nature to structure and radically modify the Parisian region. The boundaries, as you see there. Oops. No. Voilà. As you can see here, the boundaries, the tracks and pathways, the networks, the transformation, the districts, and the eye spots. And here, it's quite interesting because he compared the body of a woman with the body of the city. If you look here, it's a pregnant woman. Here is the, how do you say that, belly button, and here the fingerprints. And it's, in all the book, he do this comparison with the body and the city. The categories at shake in the rhetoric dimension of the Nouvelle Manifeste emerge from a discourse of be architecturating. Voilà. He says, to architecturate is to the great dimensions, it is not to invent ex nihilo. To architecturate is to transform, to organize the mutations of what is already there. To architecturate is to further the cementations of places that have tendency to invent themselves, to be relieved and to reorientate. It is to prolong lived story and traces of former lives. It is to be attentive to breathing, to living place, and to its pulsations. It is to interpret the rhythms for inventing. Architecture must be considered as a modification of a physical, atomic, biological continuum. The old measures established to create Paris M invite us to the place, to the passage of conception until the sensitive rules, source, and necessary confront us to insensitive urbanism. Nouvelle manifests these places as to urbanism of zones, to architecture and social and territorial forms. We thus pose as a hypothesis that there exist figures to incarn the value associated to certain type of urbanism and other figure to incarnate the values entitled by Jean Nouvel Paris M that we shall call architecturating. Each of the 9 measures enables to displace this displacement at the level of the project plan of content. It is no longer about urbanism, but about a strategy of social transformation to be applied to all the territory, to be architecturating. Enunciator that is, in our novel analysis, incarnated the actant who carries the displacement argument to another conception of social and territorial space. The project entitles Birds Under Birds, 1001 Parisian Joys, is proposed as a system of precise values by sensitive rules. The idea is to pass, I'm always doing, no, yeah, it's okay. The idea is to pass from urbanize and give more strong to architecturating, to not doing any more force to the towns, but to the man. The center of the conception is the man. Nowadays, with this project of Novel and Dutiol, ecology is more important than economy. Joy of trading is more important than efficacy of trading. Poetry of territory is more important than shops of territory. It's a displacement of this conception. The rhetoric dimension of Nouvelle discourse produce a displacement between the hierarchical levels. Of course, the economy is fundamental, but must be posed in another way if ecology is a central question. The city is fundamental, but if we don't think above all the place of the man in the space, the city loses its original meaning. As we can see by the scheme, the categories of displacement confronts complementary size where here has the category of conflict that we are going to study confronts contrary or contradictory sides, as they belong to the same semantic domains. Argumentative polemic is compatibilized size in these different semantic domains. For instance, here we see if we do more importance to distance, we have a relation with the environment and urbanize. If we emerge on the environment, we are architecturating, and we are dreamlike values, we are giving dreamlike values associated with architecture and structure conditions possibility of this rebirth and birth of the Parisian joys. But if you do more strongly the values of practices, we are in the networks, in the shop territories, and the Clun plant. Then the distance separates the subject from his environment, and the immersions creates the intimating links with the environment. The conflict between urbanizing and architecturizing is rising from novel presentation on sensitive rules. As he says, in the name of joy of living on this earth, we must fight against the urbanism of zones, networks, shop territories, against this automatic decay that cancels our identity of towns on all continents under the climates that feel on Clun's office houses and Clun business, turning from that pre-thought out and what is already preview to avoid thinking and seeing. It is necessary to reestablish sensitive poetic rules, orientations to speak of colors, of species, of characters, of anomalies, to create the specific links to rain, to the wind, to the sea, to the mountains, rules of that will speak about temporal and spatial continuum, that will orient a mutation, a modification of irritated chaos, and that will take interest in all fractal levels of our towns. The break is clear in the name of the pleasure of living in the earth. It is necessary to fight against urbanism of zones. The manifest of novel is a confrontation with the urbanism of zones that finds their resolution in an alternative project, The Great Paris, and of these architects, Novel and Dutiol. Then let's pass to the next point, the morphogenesis of this district, Salpêtrière. We considered that the district of Salpêtrière has a spatio-temporal structure in the sense that the deployment rests a formal structure of a geometric character, topological, that achieves in the space metabolitic activities of the city. We use here the term metabolic to speak about internal dynamic of space. If we consider the city has a dynamic structure between forms and forces, physical, symbolic, sociocultural, and building forms, we can consider the city has a continuous form. It's about bringing constraints of spatial temporal propagation of certain sizes of morphogenetic fields. These propagation entities, like the Avenue of France, are transporters of energetic flows, fields of signification or pregnancies. For instance, here we can see this monumental axis between La Défense, the Louvre, and the other very monumental, the Avenue Champs-Élysées. The idea of these projects is to put in the left bank this kind of avenue, the Avenue of France, and articulate all the projects through this pregnancy. And also, discontinuity forms. It is then about interactions between local continuous entities, like the hospital of Salpêtrière, and here is the old port of Paris, where arrived goods and something like that, and the station of Austerlitz, that these two architects have to articulate, and I will explain about this. To understand the morphogenesis of the Salpêtrière district and the internal dynamic of the Paris left bank operation, one must go back to 1786. For instance, here we have a barrier that separates the Salpêtrière from the city, outside the city. In that date, the bourgeois of Paris built the farm barrier. The objective was to allow the general farmers at the crossing points to take some taxes on goods entering in the city. Then this barrier is a very big hole that we can see all around the city of Paris, the old city of Paris. When the boulevard constitutes in the front of the hospital, donc this was a construction of a boulevard who put out of the city the Salpêtrière. And I will explain you now all these kind of boundaries that are integrated in the history of this project. Then, in order to exclude the land valuation, for instance, here you have the port of Paris, and here the Salpêtrière, and here we have the border of this whole who became avenue. In order to exclude the land value of the public land owner of the Saint-Marcel and Saint-Victor abbeys, situated behind the hospital, has shown Gaëtan Desmarais about the morphogenesis of Paris. In 1793, this land was sold to the national property and the landowners who did not have means to develop it. In 1840, the first railway line arrived. It entered this land and the bottom of the plot with any resistance. Then this here is the line of the trains, and this is another the metro in this date, and you see this little by little this space becomes border, like more and more Ireland. And this is important to understand the solution of Dutilleul and Jean Nouvel. Let's to see how the project and Jean Nouvel of Dutilleul for the Salpêtrière quarter will solve this series of borders and boundaries and digs that form, I see, yeah, that were formed through the morphogenesis of this place. The General Hospital of Salpêtrière in 1656 is set back from the waterway, of which the activity of trading, the rafts and that transport firewood and wood for building construction, all emanating of the center of France for Parisians. For a long time, the principal and the founding activity of these sites. In this scheme, in the same date, 1656, the hospital was no repulsive effect on the city. It is the site itself that puts in the site from the city. The low property value then stimulate the development of numerous functions, leading the detriment of other poor people, hospice, prostitutes, aliens, prison for women, and also the mental disturb in this hospital. This is the hospital where Freud and Charcot were. Then situated a little bit in historical point of view. In this image, in this scheme, 1786, between the Salpêtrière Hospital and the city, an administrative dig is created. The general farmers barrier is reinforced the rejection of this space to sideline. The general farmers barrier, as I said some minutes ago, was a wall to leave attacks from the goods who entering the city. Donc there is all the operation now, and as you can see, there is a frontier here, a frontier here, and this continues to be a very island. And here, as you can see, is a kind of how do you say that? A lot of bricks and bricks and a lot of buildings, very strange in the city. And I will explain about this after. Oops. Hi. Okay. I think it's no. Okay. In 1840, the rail lines and the Austerlitz rail station create an impassable area to isolates one more the hospital and the whole French of the 30 municipality of Paris. The construction of the line, as I said, of the metropolitan rail transportation in this symbolic place of the former farmers barrier isolates the hospital from the city by aerial dig. For instance, the chaotic extension of the railways built in front of this facade hides this monument. The Salpêtrière was built in 1156 by Louis XIV and constructed by the architect Liberal Bruyant. The construction of the hospital of this site substitute Arsenal in this place. In this, oops, no, it was not this real, no, Okay, that there was one. Yeah. In this image, we can see the construction of this bridge, the bridge, this one here, the Charles de Gaulle bridge, and it was possible because they destroyed the there was here some buildings of the port, and also they destroyed this building that makes possible the end of the Avenue of France. This was quite strange because a lot of associations don't want that this building goes out, and it takes 10 years for argue and argue and argue. And this bridge can relay the Austerlitz station to the Gare de Lyon station, and that was important to this operation. The retabulation, this was another problem. Normally, there was a passage between through this hall in le vitre. How do you say that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, glass hall. Yeah. And here here the reestablishment of the perspective of main facade of the hospital equilibrates the chaos installed for 150 years. The unitary composition of the building up from parallel to the axis of the underlines of axial line between the hospital and the city. As you can see here, this is the project of the urbanist project of Nouvelle and Dutiol. You know, for resolving all these boundaries, frontiers, walls, and all this kind of they cover all the lines. The project is to cover all the lines, and here to give a kind of square to give a relation to the river. And here there is a lot of activities like cafes and things like that. And here is the entrance of Gare TGV. And here is another square. And here is a kind of, you know, it's a kind of frontier that you can pass through. It's not a wall that we can pass through. But they proposed, and that was a very huge controversy with different actors of this project, that, for instance, in Paris, you have a very structure of habitation, very, you know, very small. And the proposal of Nouvelle and Dutiol was to create a big facade who can make a you know, who can create a real square here, and to eliminate the walls of the hospital and to give really this ambience. And this was very important, and I don't know if will be realized, because in the meantime, Nouvelle and Dutiol were, you know, go out of this project, and they give other buildings in the operation in another region, not so important. Here is too important to monuments of Paris. Then let's go to see how these values are articulated with this main avenue that I spoke about some minutes ago. Yes. Here is another photo to see how this articulation, here is the TGV and here is the other trains, everything will be covered. And the projects proposed here a bridge to open this space of the hospital and proposed to organize this mess and proposed to organize the very, it's before the proposal of Nouvelle and Dutiol. Oops, this is the station now, and I show some minutes how will be. This is now, and here you can see the building that they take down to resolve this problem of this avenue, and also an entrance of the gare, the train station, of course. Here is the creation of the relation between the Seine River and the train station. Another image. Here is the construction of this part, and here is the resolution of the project to open this part to the. Here is the Seine, and here is a very huge entrance of this station. Here you can see the project. Here is the entrance of the station, and here is the metro, of course, and the reorganization. This becomes a commercial center, and here is another view of the square. Here is the Seine, La Seine, and here you have the proposal of Jean Nouvel, then the huge building, and who can equilibrate with this big facade and construct a real square. They compare this square to Vosges square, but I'm laughing because it's not the same ambience, but okay. And they construct here a street you can pass through, and here a bridge, as you see. Then it's a quite interesting option to resolve all these borders and digs and of this region, and to calm down this conflictual space. Here is, oops, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Here is then this square, the idea of this square, and here is a view of this avenue. As you see, the presence of the metro is very very strong. Here is another square in here, in front of the gare, and here another view of the same square from here, and here is the maquette of the plan of Jean Nouvel and Dutiol for the urbanism region. And here is the articulating of the Avenue de France. You should know that in the beginning of this project, 20 years ago, when we began this project, the idea was to pass through this avenue. This bridge is here to pass through the hall, and the project should be another thing. Then I will continue with the, I don't know how many time? 10 minutes. Mamma mia. Okay. I'm in the beginning of my, okay. Okay, bon. When you want, you stop me. Then in the beginning of it's important to understand this idea. The 30 Heart of Paris, Jacques Toubon asserts and to agreed in the discourse of the district developer that this town is born from a kind of constitutive continuity with the river, which has inspired magnific architectural works and almost beautiful districts of Paris. The Paris Bank Left Bank project is naturally born from the constructive continuity. As the river reflects itself when heaven gave rise to the construction of monumental axis of this town. As you can see in this figure, this is this kind of trying to do a kind of continuity, and all around of this axis there is the Arc of Défense, the Institut du Monde Arabe, the Pyramide du Louvre, and also the National Library where we are intervening, where we are working. The agglutinating factor on the difference of discourses between the monumental axis with is not always situated on the banks of the river. The inclusion of the river has the you have to know that the river of Seine was Notre Dame and the cathedral, and all these buildings are considered by the World Patrimony of UNESCO. And the different discourses of these projects by this enterprise is that really we have to do something really good, because it's we want that that part of the project will also classify monumental of UNESCO stuff. And the territory chosen of the construction of the left bank is spread over to 1.5 kilometers of length, and possess several physical characteristics which prevent this urban continuity, railway stations, lines and groups of factories, airways, and all along the river banks actuate the separation in between two wards, two municipalities, the 30 and the 12. The city had, the idea was to rely these two municipalities, this one and this one. There was two operations here. The idea of the project will be precisely to transform the borders, railways, group of factories, warehouse, and the river of Seine into elements of expression of continuity. This first border abolished one of the town passes over the railway lines. The project does remain anchored in the pre-existing structure, as we can show us. The second border, the whole group of factories, warehouses, will be demolished, all these parts in front of the Seine, and give buildings, public buildings, interest to be integrated in the project. For instance, there was a very huge Halle des Farines, who is now the University of Paris Diderot. And for instance, the School of Architecture was a electricity building. Then was a requalification of all this front of the city. The third border will be resolved at the time as a monumental construction of the National Library. The avenue parallel with the river Seine. In one side, the National Library emphasizes the monumental character by the huge wooden staircase, and the other, its wall of glasses, reflect the river, and in the same way of the great part of the buildings of the Paris Left Bank project. The continuity with the river, and which the monumental axis becomes progressively the principal generator of the project. This axis is much more accentuated by the construction of the Avenue de France, which will gradually become the structuring element of this project, making thereby reference in the structural terms to the Champs-Élysées, and this project is situated according to the system of the discourse of this enterprise. Of course, it's not reality, but in this discourse is a continuity with the Champs-Élysées, and the monumental, and a continuity also with the monumental axis of Paris. I have some minutes or more? No. 2 minutes. Okay. And to finish, I only show something. There is other frontiers that are frontiers of research, and maybe for a discussion is important. Our research is situated across two professions that are not used coming across each other, that of research and that of architects and town planners. I have spent much of my career trying to respond to the question, how are the theories and the praxis within the unity of the project linked up? In my research, I try to resolve this theoretical frontier, as the urban project convokes several disciplines that must be articulated from the interior. In order to do that, I built an interdisciplinary model that enables to apprehend the physical forms and the meaning at the same time as a whole. And the frontier between theory, praxis, I associate my two professional experience, that of researcher as a morphodynamics, semiotics, and also as an architect and a town planner. And I think I have to, this is only a reflection about our disciplines.
Thank you, Isabel. We will, the questions after the two lectures, because it will be very complicated now. The second lecture, Luis Schaula, I said before, is related to the experience she has now in a very different place of Paris, but with a lot of possibilities of making links in Boulder, Colorado, where you know the transformations, social transformation of the city for the crisis. Yeah, it's difficult. That's technical questions. It's a difficult settings now, social and physical, and she's making also work as an urban planner, urban education, and social activist in different neighborhoods of Boulder. I think that is good comparison between two very different sites, but with all the complexity of design, research, practice, and education. Then she can start.
Give me a few minutes to get set up.
Yeah.
Maybe if there are any questions, Jose? It will take me a few minutes to get set up here. Perhaps if anyone has an immediate question for Isabel while I get started.
Your USB because the projection is just there.
See, I don't use this at
No,
all.
if you want to use the
We are in time, very good. We are not out of time. That is usual in the Congress to be very late, and we are right. No problem to follow.
Okay, well. I'm an environmental psychologist. Okay. I'm an environmental psychologist, and as Jose Montañola said, I did my doctorate at the City University of New York, working with really the founders of environmental psychology. And are all of you familiar with environmental psychology? Yes. it happened really simultaneously. I don't know the French story of it, but in England and in the United States, it arose as part of the whole ferment, social ferment of the 1960s, when architects and urban planners who were seeing the dysfunctional buildings and dysfunctional places created by post-World War II urban development reached out to social researchers, and in this case primarily social psychologists in the United States, to be able to document what was wrong with these public spaces and the new really faceless, inhuman streets, highways, and the new buildings that were being built, and that really worked against human needs. And so one of the great urbanists and humanists of that period of the 1960s and the 1970s in the United States was Kevin Lynch. And how many of you are familiar with his work? Okay, so at least half of you. He was an urban designer at the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Very influential with a professor of mine, and who was my connection to Jose Montagnola, Roger Hart. They were both developing very simple methods of observation and public participation at the same time, and they discovered each other and shared the new methods that they were developing together. And I'm very inspired by the work of Kevin Lynch, because my first background was in human development. So as a psychologist of child development and human development, and then I went from there to environmental psychology. So my question has always been the same one as Kevin Lynch. How do we create cities that create places for the fullest realization of our humanity, of all dimensions of our humanity? And that was what drove Kevin Lynch throughout his life. This is a quotation from an interview done shortly before his death. He died in 1985, just as I was beginning my studies. So I think that creates for us this question. So my talk is going to be very practical. And when I say how do we create places that help people develop their full potential as human beings, I'm going to talk about that in very practical terms within a school of design education. How do we create opportunities for our students to pursue this question and have that same vision of cities as places for human development. And I'd be very interested, Jose, during the roundtable time, if you would comment on how my talk relates to the student sit-ins that are going on right now, and whether this form of design education that I'm going to be presenting, if it relates to the contemporary student concerns right now in Barcelona. So I would love to know about that. So that's one big question then. How do we create places for the full realization of our humanity and our human development at different ages? And then I'm going to talk specifically about how do we do that for places for children and youth and families with young children, where they can realize their needs, their visions, their aspirations for development in the city. And then the other part is these practical methods. So this is from the interview with Kevin Lynch again. He said, so how do we do this? How do we create these kinds of places? And he said, well, one of the most important things we need to do is to develop very simple methods for understanding how different groups experience the city, and what their aspirations are for their localities to be places that they can appropriate and where they can that they can shape, and that where they can find what they need and also shape that place so it carries their impression. So simple methods for us as professionals, and also that we can give to ordinary citizens as a way of documenting their needs and communicating with the urban development and with the city government, and also with architects and urban planners, landscape architects. And so this was Kevin Lynch's vision from the 1960s and 1970s. If you know his work, this is what his work was about. And we're really carrying on that vision. So here are some images of some of these simple methods that Kevin Lynch developed and borrowed, partly working with Roger Hard, Robin Moore, if you know him also, who was a student of Kevin Lynch. So there was a lot of development of methods going on. One of Kevin Lynch's projects was growing up in cities. He did that for UNESCO, and it was implemented in 4 countries in the 1970s, and where Lynch experimented with methods he was already developing to work with adults. But he was frustrated. He's very well known for his book, The Image of the City, but he was frustrated that it was a kind of a frozen image. And he wanted to understand, how do people's relationship with the city develop? And he thought the best way to do that would be to work with children. So these are some of the methods that he developed. We revived the Growing Up in Cities program, and that was, I reconnected with UNESCO in the 1990s. And I did that because I was actually working then at the University of Trondheim for 2 years. And the city of Trondheim in Norway was about to celebrate their 1,000th anniversary and wanted to do something big. And so they helped fund the recreation of Kevin Lynch's Growing Up in Cities project. And I coordinated that for 10 years for UNESCO. We started out in 8 countries with a very close coordination, and then it spread to many others with looser coordination. But you see here some of the methods that Kevin Lynch originally developed, and that we used in these in our revival of the Growing Up in Cities project. And so you see, let's see. Okay. Behavior mapping, so very systematic process of observation in public spaces. Walking tours, in this case it's children taking a social worker in Argentina, in Rio de Janeiro, around showing the special places in their barrio. Of course, children's drawings, and then interviews with children about their drawings, and having children serve as researchers and interviewing. In this case, it was about the renovation of this abandoned vacant lot, and so what is the meaning of that lot for different people within the barrio, and children as researchers. So working with researchers and doing research themselves. So I'll be talking about those 2 questions. How do we create places for human development, and in particular, how do we do it for young people? But I'm also going to be talking about the very practical side of that, of how do we create structures within a program of design education so that design students can have these kinds of experiences of working with community members as an ongoing way that's integrated into their education. So how can we create permanent structures of partnership with with the city government, with community-based organizations, with school districts, so that students have these opportunities as an ongoing part of their design education and emerge feeling really competent about working with communities in participatory ways. Okay. And as I said, so how do you create those ongoing structures for partnership and relationship? So we began this, so I'm in the city of Boulder. It's a very small city. It's of 100,000 people. But the city council in Boulder for decades, it calls itself a petri dish city. It prides itself on being experimental and progressive and on many fronts, many fronts of urban development. But on this one too, it just so happened I was then based at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and we get a new director of community planning and sustainability and housing, who's David Driscoll, who had been my partner in reviving Growing Up in Cities in the mid-1990s. So we were already very comfortable working together and shared this vision of the importance of bringing children and youth and design students into the participatory decision-making in their city. And so a colleague, Willem van Vliet, had created this Children, Youth, and Environment Center for Community Engagement. And this is a structure that is so important to create a permanent structure in a program of design education. And as you can see, we have the kind of major partners. In our case, it has been agencies of city government, and the school district, and the university, our design program. It can include other members of local professionals who have a strong commitment to this kind of work. It is absolutely essential to have paid staff. And we began with a part-time staff person. We now have a full-time staff person as our efforts have grown. But to have these ongoing partnerships with community groups, you have to have someone who is paid to maintain them. And who also, of course, the other critical part of this are the faculty who want to do community engagement projects. And then they supervise, they work with student interns and graduate students, and also community partners then help supervise the graduate students, the student interns, and work very closely with the faculty affiliates to make these community engagement projects work. So I'm going to show you a few organizational charts, and then later I'll get on to some very specific examples of projects and how it works in practice. So we went for 10 years as the Children, Youth, and Environment Center for Community Engagement. We began to do intergenerational communities too, because older residents in cities have many of the same needs as children. And so our name no longer completely represented what we were doing. But every 10 years, centers have to be reauthorized in our university. So when we went up for reauthorization in 2015, we have this more general name, which really applies to all ages, all groups, the Community Engagement Design and Research Center, and very similar structure, as you can see, taken from our original center. So these are just a few images from the general, this larger center, and then I will focus on a project with children and youth within it. But so it begins with, the city has priorities for redevelopment every year. So they have this permanent structure with our center. They have a formal memorandum of understanding with our center. they actually put in major funding. We have several funding sources, but the city puts in major funding for that staff person. And it's done agency by agency. And so each agency could be Parks and Recreation or Open Space and Mountain Parks, because we have like half an acre of green space for every resident in the city. So much of our city is dedicated to green space. We have 2 different park systems as a result. With the Department of Transportation, the Department of Community Planning, Arts and Culture, whatever city agency it is that wants to get input from children, teenagers, families with children, for their priority redevelopment projects of the coming year. Then they put money into our center, and the staff person is going to, in return, really commit that proportion of her time to organizing and coordinating projects for that city agency. So that's our major funding arrangement. And I think an open question then becomes, how do you secure funding under different situations? But all the city agencies are required to do community participation, and really none of their staff have time or the skills to do it with young people. And if you go to public meetings with the city workshops, reviews of public planning proposals, you don't have families with young children showing up there either. They're usually scheduled in the evening and they're home with their children. So to get those voices, which are very important to the city kind of contracts out these participatory processes to our center. And then we involve our design students. So the city comes in at the beginning of each year and says, these are our redevelopment priorities. This is what we need information about, public voices about. And then our center presents that to all of our faculty. And then we have some faculty who are very committed to this, and then others who will just say, oh yes, that project grabs my attention. And then they make that the practical focus of their design studio. We also always have student interns that are working with our community partners and that are also engaged. But so you see here some images of that. So you'll have a design studio, and they will go visit the site, wherever the sites are in the city. City staff come in and talk to the students and the faculty about their needs, their visions, and where they need information through design research. The design students are taught basic methods of design research, and they go out, do observations, do a variety. You'll see some examples, a variety of participatory processes such as Kevin Lynch was talking about. And for example, I was in one of the a major redevelopment going on, and I was good to just pick up a lunch at a supermarket in that area. And there was a table out front, and there was a design student, and he was collecting surveys from local residents about their vision for the redevelopment of this area, and he belonged to the design studio that was working on this project. And then they go to public workshops, as you can see there, with the students presenting to members of the public. They've done the design research. They've done a lot of background research on the site. They present it, and they present it at public meetings. And engage in dialogue again with community members. And then at the end of every semester, we have a general report out. We have a public building in downtown, and the students do a general report out of their final their final designs, their final recommendations to the city. And the city staff come to that, but also quite a lot of community members come because they've already been part of the process, and then they want to see what the students have come up with in the end. And that's a picture of that. So for example, what is a very big project going on now is we had a 2-block square area of an old hospital. And the new hospital, much larger hospital, has moved to another part of the city. And so it is very difficult now for the city to acquire space like that. Boulder's a very desirable city, and there's a very high demand for land and real estate there. But so the city has this 2-block area where the old hospital was, and that's been now for 2 years ongoing subject for design studios of different possible reuses for that space. And so this is a student, again, engaging with a local community member on ideas for that space. We also do design-build projects. This is in the Central Park in the city, and it was, again, for several years, it was the focus of redevelopment and redesign ideas involving our design studios and also design-build. So when we were working with the children and youth, they wanted tree houses in this new redeveloped park. And then the professional community thought about it, heard about it, and thought, oh, that's really cool, tree houses in the public park. Of course, then you get into all of the rules, and for safety reasons, you can't really have a tree house way up in the tree. We are a city, we are a country where insurance rules to a large degree what we can do in our public spaces. But so here is a revision of a tree house that our design students designed and built, and it has Wi-Fi connection. So it served as a public space outside our Museum of Contemporary Art for many months. And then it moved to a new site, which is on the campus, but our campus is also a public space, so open to all people in the community. And we had the theater and dance students had just come and shown how you can use it as a platform for a dance production. And then we had, these are community artists and dancers who were leading everybody and dancing at the celebration when we moved the tree house to the campus, where it's very heavily used by students as an outdoor workspace. And then there was a banquet table, and that's where most of the people were when we did this photograph. So that is a general structure for involving our design students in community engagement projects. And now I'm going to focus on one of our programs called Growing Up Boulder, which is specifically about involving our design students in work with children and teenagers and families with children. And so this is not a real sign, unfortunately, but it's photoshopped. But as part of being this idea of an experimental city, a petri dish city, there's the desire on the part of the city council for how can we really be progressive in engaging children and youth in city decision making. And so this was our aspiration for the city, to be the #1 child and youth friendly city in the United States. And this is the vision of the program. So to make Boulder an exemplary child and youth friendly city, but also at the core of it, and this was really the driving force coming from city government, is to develop a sense of citizenship in young people as they are growing up in the city, of feeling that they are really citizens, and what does that mean, and understanding how city government works and how they can interact with it. And then at the same time as they're doing that, it changes the culture of city government and city decision making. And so you see each program has its own structure, and you see a structure very similar to the larger community engagement center. But where the real magic happens here is we have, again, we have our executive committee with the major partners who've signed a formal memorandum of understanding with each other. In this case, it is the city government and the school district and our design program. And so they meet twice a year, and then we have a steering committee which is made up of not just the public school system, but some private schools, also many community-based organizations, arts organizations. So really, we've had 20 different community organizations that come in and get involved in the steering committee. And it varies. The cluster that comes depends on what the project is and what is relevant for them. But so this really becomes a way of developing stronger ties, stronger networks between city government, the school system, our design program, the university as a whole, and all these different community organizations. And the steering committee meets every 2 months. And what I've seen happen over the years is, in the beginning, it was sort of formal, and as the years have gone on, people know each other. They know the talents, the kinds of creativity that each group brings. And there's this really sense of, oh, you do this best, so you take charge of this part, and we know these are your skills, and they kind of really know how to work together on all these different groups to bring their different talents and skills and community outreach, because these community organizations are the medium through which we reach different residents in the city. We have a very strong mission to involve low-income and ethnic children and youth and families in the city who would otherwise never show up for a formal city meeting. And yet the city has a very strong commitment to them. I was telling Isabel earlier when we were on our way here, we have a real division in the United States between our rural areas, which determine the outcome of our recent presidential election, and our cities. And more, our cities across the United States are becoming politically progressive and liberal. Even in states that are otherwise Republican, the cities now tend to be liberal. And so this is where the real social experimentation can happen. And it's where that effort to include all of the citizens of the city in decision making can happen, and what we're experimenting with the models we've created. So again, just historically, we have kind of three inspirations for the work we do. We have UNESCO's Growing Up in Cities project of Kevin Lynch, which I already talked about. And then both UNICEF and UN Habitat are strongly based on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Is there anyone else here besides myself from the United States? No, okay. That means every one of you belongs to a country that has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, where your city government has an obligation to try to live by its principles. So this is from UNICEF, its definition of a child-friendly city. It's about implementing the Convention on the Rights of the Child by local government. To improve the lives of children by recognizing their rights, and in the process transforming communities for the better, for today and the future. there were three kinds of rights in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Children have a right to protection, and they have a right to a provision of their basic needs, and they have a right to participation. And there are two kinds of participation. Whether or not informal participation, whether or not they're included in the public spaces of their cities, and whether or not these are really inviting spaces for them where they not only feel safe, but where they feel, again, that they can realize their basic needs for development. So informal participation in the daily cultural life of the city. And then there's formal participation. Do they have formal processes to make their voices heard in city decision making? And ideally, a city should examine all of its laws and policies and its design programs, its urban planning decisions about whether or not they are consistent with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So what we've developed through that structure I showed you before is this very top-down, bottom-up process of urban decision-making. We have at the top, in the city of Boulder, we began with the Department of Community Planning and Sustainability, and then very soon the Department of Parks and the Department of Transportation realized, oh, what you're doing is really useful, can we do it too? And then came to our community engagement program to also become formal partners in the process. And then, as I said, we have this large, like over 43,000 acres of open space and mountain parks. Our housing agency has become part of it, Children, Youth, and Family Services, Arts and Culture. So those are for all of the different city agencies that are now involved, and the school district and our design program. And then that bubbling up from the bottom is that steering committee work I talked about, where we have multiple community-based organizations that are also part of the process, and that reach down to local areas and to outreach. Some work with teenagers, some particularly with the more socially marginalized families, which in our city are Latino families. And some work with children with disabilities or with the very young, like our Head Start program. So the different community organizations reach all of the different, we really try to reach all of the different groups of children and youth in the city through them, through their medium. And I already talked about the different meeting structure that we have there that works together in a very important way. And so these are all of the key principles that we have discovered that make this project work. And I'm going to focus now on this last one, and I don't know if the chairs are blocking it, but it's how do you integrate activities into university classes, internships, service learning, and graduate students' research. So I'm going to show you a few of our projects to give you a sense of different ways of doing that. We always have several projects every year, and over the years we've got many, many different projects at this point. But these represent some different approaches to integrating this into design education. So we did a project with a focus on access for children with disabilities, playground access for children with disabilities. And in an elementary school where fifth grade would be the 11-year-olds, this was their last year in their school, and as a legacy to their school, they became involved with the design program for this project. And then all of the second year design studios worked on this together. And it was organized by a graduate student, a doctoral student, Sean Edmonds, who was very much interested in this, and it was a way for him to explore design for disabilities as part of his doctoral work. And so one of the things that Sean organized is in the school library, He had a couple wheelchairs, some walking sticks for the blind, blindfolds, and children could check them out of their school library and just really play with them, move around the schoolyard, and, you know, as if they had disabilities, as if they were blind or as if they were confined to a wheelchair. So they had this for free exploration of their schoolyard through different kinds of mobilities. And then each of the fifth grade elementary school classes took a different part of the school ground, and then each of the second year design studios also took a part of the school ground. So each design studio was working with one of the classes of children. And really then it was the students had to learn about design for disabilities, and then they worked with the younger children in, you know, working on elevations and materials and ground covers and different types of play equipment for different abilities. So the design students had to study this and then share it, mentor the elementary school classes in their different areas that they had taken on. So scoping out the playground, sketching ideas. You can see a design student there working with the younger students. And again, our design students in the classroom developing their ideas and then hanging them up for discussion and for other classes to view and for critique. And then a final presentation where the 11-year-olds came to our design program in the university, and they had made models, and they did formal presentations to members of city government that were very interested in children's ideas for designing for children with disabilities, and also to their teachers, to school district administrators, and to the playground committee that was ultimately going to allocate the budget for the redesign of their school ground. So that was an example of involving all of the studios at 1 year in the project. So the Great Green Neighborhoods Praxis Studio. In the junior year semester is a praxis studio where every studio picks a different community engagement project. And so I'm going to focus on one of them again that involved working with children. In the fall of 2013, we had a 500-year flood in Boulder. I think it was on the news around the world because I was getting email from people all over the world, "Are you okay?" But it was really a major flood. So it happened in the middle of this process, or as we were starting this process, and the site happened to be in the floodplain. So everybody had designing in a floodplain was very much on the mind of everybody in the city. And so we worked with, we worked actually both with an elementary school and also with a middle school. And those are the faculty members who worked on that. And so it started out in the fall with going into the public schools. And at that point, the students who were involved were design student interns. And they really learned how to work intensively with participatory methods, working with the school children. And they were doing this actually both in the elementary school and in a middle school. So the middle school were like 13-year-olds. In this case, it's 8-year-olds, so 8-year-olds and 13-year-olds. And so the city, one of its big priorities is creating walkable neighborhoods, new walkable residential neighborhoods with all of the needs within a 15-minute walking distance. And also green infrastructure is very, very important. And so this was a year-long project. where the fall was spent with a year-long study of this design project within the schools. So the students did they really studied the site themselves. They engaged with city staff and had conversations with city staff about what their needs and their goals were. They studied different kinds of materials and really studied design. So they were very well informed by the end of the semester when they did their drawings and their models. And then in the spring semester, all of that work was passed on to the praxis studio of junior, third year design students who had to respond to the ideas of the 8-year-olds and the 13-year-olds in their work. And I'll show you how that worked. So this is in the fall, and this is in the elementary school. So the students had studied the needs of green infrastructure neighborhoods, floodplain management, design within a floodplain, and materials for green buildings. They'd studied all of this working with our design interns. And then this is their final present out when they're presenting their models, their ideas, their drawings for what would make such a new development child-friendly. And they're then presented, so they had everything on display, and city staff, city council members, members of the planning commission came, and also the architect. You can just see the top of his head there, Michael Tavel, but really a very accomplished new urbanist architect, came for the children's present out to get their ideas. And he's the one with a partner who's going to be in charge of the spring design studio. And I think I just asked the children what was your favorite part of the project, and they all had lots of favorite parts of the project. Meanwhile, the middle school students, the 13-year-olds, were also studying the project. This is later in the spring when they go into the studio, and they are the critics for the junior, the third year design students. So they'd been studying it also. The way it worked with the elementary school students is the design students went to the elementary school and presented their initial concept designs, and again, their first jury were, in this case, the 8-year-olds. Like, did they see their ideas, their recommendations embodied in the design students' work? And then when the students had their formal juries with professionals, one of the, I know myself and another architect really wanted them to be very specific. How have you taken those ideas that you were given, and where do we see them realized in the designs that you're presenting to us? So they're really held to that standard of responding to the input that they had gotten. And what you can see here is this was, again, by the creek where there had been major flooding. All of the white buildings are part of the new development. It was actually part of our campus. It was graduate student housing that was up for redevelopment. So they were working also with our university architect and his department. And so honoring the creek bed, the floodplain, but also the creek was very important to the children. Initially, when they heard about, oh, this is a flood area, they thought, well, we'll build a wall around the buildings. And then they realized, well, wait a moment, but then we'll all be walled in. So they had to think about new ways of doing it because access to the creek was very important to them. They wanted courtyard living where they could be semi-protected, but also easily go out and move about the space, so pathways were very important. And a big emphasis on all of the senses, on sight and smell and sound and touch and taste, and working with children, all of the senses are very important, and so students had to respond to that. So you see, for example, instead of a wall around the buildings, the idea of a berm, which has gone into the final design to protect the buildings, but also it forms a wonderful play space, play opportunities. And they wanted edible landscaping, which is part of, so these are the third-year students, some of their designs which responded to the children's ideas. Okay, last project I want to show you. So we also have service learning goals within our design program. And we have a program called Designers Without Boundaries. These are our design students who are the first people in their families to go to a university. And so a very diverse group of students, and they have their club, and a major part of their club's mission is service learning. So this was a service learning example of working with students. So the Parks and Recreation Department had been hearing from us for years, since we began in 2009, that parks are not built. They're built for little children and they're built for adults. They're not built for young teenagers and older teenagers. And so, for example, you'll see the older teenagers are playing with the small children's equipment, but they have to be very inventive in terms of how they're going to use it. And what we find repeatedly in working with young people is they do not just think of themselves. Much more than adults, they think about all of the groups in the city. And the younger the children are, the more the younger children also think about all of this animals in the city, all of the species and the biodiversity, which almost never comes across when adults are talking about what they want in their cities. But we find the young children, they want cities that are good for ducks and butterflies and squirrels and all the animals that fascinate them as well. And so you see here, what do I want? I want a place to be a place for all ages, but including ourselves. So the design students in the design club went into the high school, and also the high school students came to our design program, and they coached, they mentored the teens as the teens developed their ideas for what would be a teen-friendly park. And we also had design interns who, for example, built these wood topographical bases for their models. And what was very important was hangout places, quiet spaces with Wi-Fi outdoors in the park, but also risk. And how do you realize risk? And that became a big question. How do you realize risk in a safe enough way in a public park? Okay, very last things. I'm almost finished. By having this ongoing permanent community engagement center as part of our design program, every semester we get to bring in a speaker, and who generally talk about different participatory processes. This past spring, for example, we had Giovanni Allegretti on participatory budgeting as part of a planning process. And we also have formed that communication with local professionals who want to work in participatory ways. So these presentations, they serve to educate our students, our faculty, and local professionals and city staff. And usually every time a speaker comes in to talk about a participatory method, they'll also have a special workshop with city staff. So it's also training for city staff, and local professionals can be part of that as well. And our students who are most interested in these methods also then go to the workshops with city staff as well. And so the center's really it's a center for new ideas to enter the city also for participatory ways. So for example, Stanley King, he's a Canadian architect. He has a book, Co-Design. I totally recommend it to you. It's a wonderful method. And it's very, very sensory. It involves working with these small groups. In this case, he's doing his workshop, and in there are faculty, city staff, design students, being trained in the process. And it's very sensory based. So in this place, what do you want to feel on your skin? What do you want to smell? What do you want to hear? And then the artist draws that building up from those sensory qualities that people want to experience in this place. So our students were also trained in that method, and then the Department of Transportation a couple months later had a big bike walk summit to get ideas from the public on active transportation through walking and biking. What kind of infrastructure do you want in the city for that? And those are our design students. They were professional artists, architects also, but these are our design students who had been trained in that process by Stanley King, who are now serving as the facilitators at this public workshop. And again, these are our design students who are learning to work with the public in these new ways. And one last, James Rojas, who's developed for outreach with low-income communities who would be intimidated by kind of very formal, beautiful architectural pieces. So he works with these presenting, and then he's training, again, city staff, local professionals, and our students. He gets these just a mix of just found objects, very bright found objects, which he says encourage people to build little models in very creative ways. And people who would be intimidated by feeling they're part of a formal architecture program feel comfortable using these objects, which really, James Rojas says, encourage creative thinking. And then people have little sheets and they make their models of what they would like to see and whatever the space of interest is. And then they're photographed and they say a little bit about what these models represent, what they want to see in this space, and then they all go back in the bag again for the next group. So it's a very quick, ephemeral way of getting input. So then we need to follow up. So we need to ensure that it's not just one-way ideas, that the ideas go to our city agencies, but we need to ensure that the groups that have shared their ideas, that something's going to be done with their ideas. So, and this has really changed city culture. Even in our very progressive city, I think initially it was like, oh great, nice ideas, a lot of creative ideas we've gotten there, very refreshing, the end. And so, again, having a staff person who works with the city agencies in an ongoing way went back and said, but wait a minute, you need to come back and you need to show these groups how you are using their ideas. So a lot of visual representation then in that process. So for example, in the civic area, there's now a nature play area that the children wanted, and these are from the city architects' renderings of, and they go back to the children saying, okay, this is where you see your ideas represented. And then in the final structures, finding, if the children have graduated by then, but going back to their classes and saying, look, it was your class in the previous year that had input, and then having them there for the red ribbon cutting ceremony. We just did that too. So for example, the bike walk summit that you saw people working on. So this is a pictomap, and with identifying specifically where are the children's ideas and their parents with young children, where are their ideas in our master plan for active transport structure. Okay, so just last few slides, I'm almost done. So these are ideas that come up again and again and again when the children are, over the years, since 2009, we see recurring ideas. But it's not just about, okay, so what are their ideas, but it's also that process of democracy that we have to keep doing together. So even if we keep hearing some of the same ideas, they're always realized in a different, unique way in each unique site. And we're all doing democracy together, which is so important. So I'm closing with a few comments. So what do the design interns say and the design students? That they learn how to do design research with community groups. And they learn how to communicate with a variety of different community groups. And I think this is probably the biggest thing that our design students gain are these communication skills. I mean, they've learned those techniques like Kevin Lynch was talking about of quick ways to work with the community to get input. But in the process, they're learning that you need to be able to communicate with the people you're designing for and how to do that. We have many publications from our faculty that have come out for this, so it's very good for faculty too. It's, they gain a lot from it. Many other publications, and I'd be happy to share more with you if you're interested later. And the school district, we have it's very important so the students in the school district, they are seeing architecture students as their role models. And so, for example, in the teen-friendly park, the teens who got involved were teens who thought they were interested in design. They might want to become designers. And so then they have that connection with the design students who become role models for them. And this is David Driscoll, who is one of the people who started this process. And for him, and I think for the city council, this is a process of democracy, of doing democracy, of learning citizenship, and our city is very invested in that. So if you want to learn more about it, those are websites where there is a lot of information. And just that Great Green Neighborhoods in particular, this is a great website, designingwithchildren.net. It has examples from all over the world, and it also features the Great Green Neighborhoods project that I told you about. But there's a lot more information on the web, and please come and talk to me. I would also really like to know more about what you are doing in terms of participatory processes for engaging with communities, because as we go out and talk about what we're doing, we also want to bring ideas back and integrate them into our city too.
Okay, we have now the coffee break outside, and then we'll make the round table. Okay. We will start with any questions, the two lectures, different lectures. I start with the two questions that Luis indirectly asked me. One question is the role of Kevin Lynch, that she was very clear to put in her lecture. I invited Kevin Lynch twice here. He came twice here, and really the first time was more in one mood, and the second time was more in the other second part of the work. And he reacted very well that the second time, that one thing is the image of the city, another thing is the second part, that he insisted a lot about the political dimension of the work and the change of the architect in relation to that, not just to teach children outside the architecture. Twice, he came twice. The profession in Catalonia, absolutely no interest at all. No? At all. There was almost nobody here. Yeah. But he insisted to come the two times, knowing that the first time was 2 people and the second time 3 people. But he was very positive in that.
Yes.
He wanted really to insist that the architects can learn a lot with that. Of course, the book was used by the city planners in Barcelona. That was the 82, 84, no? And the 78 perhaps. All the architects all the professors of urban planning in Barcelona now Kevin Lynch, but it's like, well, it's a practical tool, no? But not in the sense of the profound change in attitude of the designer if you really involve the knowledge from the point of view of the users. No, this is not really very used in the School of Barcelona. But he was very positive with all the organization. That was the prehistoric beginning.
Well, and if I can add, when I was reviving the Growing Up in Cities project and preparing its revival for UNESCO, I went to the Kevin Lynch archives at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and went through all of his papers related to that project. And he was very frustrated that they did all this work with children in 4 countries, and in one of them, in Argentina, they actually, the children proposed ideas for a public plaza, and they still had in the archives their overlay, their tracing paper that they had overlaid on the map of the plaza and all of their ideas drawn on it. And then the architects that were working with the children presented that to the city officials, and there was no interest at all. And the same thing in Australia, the young urban planner working with the children drove a busload of children down to a city a city meeting. And there was no interest at all. And Kevin Lynch was very frustrated by that.
In this way, that's, and Roger Harbour has been here, of course, 3 or 4 times also. That's one question. The second question is who asked, now the students, the high school students and the university students, how they react now with all that, no? It's very nice situation now. Because the students of architecture, first time in 40 years, they have make a contestation, very strong claim against the head of the school and against all the professors now in the school. And then they have paid physically, they are sleeping there. They take the place and then, we will see. We need to change our registration table because we have no place. We get just the beginning because you cannot touch anything. They invited the whole thing as a protestation of the claim, and the claim is very related to the problem here. There are two parts of the claim that I think are related. One is that the body senses, no, the relation, the bodily relation. The phenomenological relation with design through Habermas, Balasma, Stephen Hall, Zumthor, has arrived to the students of architecture are very sensitive to that. And that has relation both with children and with the young novel ideas of poetic. They are very sensitive to that. If you teach Le Corbusier, they say, I don't know Le Corbusier, who is Le Corbusier? They don't want to know nothing now. In a lot of universities here, schools of architecture, no? The professors are very, very frustrated because we're used to show Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe, everybody, oh, that's fantastic. And now they say, no, we are not interested. This has nothing to do with our way to do architecture. Then they are beginning to see that there is a change. No? And the second change is the freedom of which kind of attitude I can have in relation to architecture. No? That also has relation with all that. I want to select if one studio is more related to participation. I can, but if one student of architecture cannot go to the student participation, it's a kind of freedom of thinking, and they have represent. I will see signs in the school saying that there are some different animals, white animals, there is a black animal, like the patito feo, it's a black animal, and they say the head of the school has crossed the black animal, except the white only, but the black not. They have the sensation that there is some kind of policy making, the inquisitory process, the Inquisition, that it's a trick, because It seems that it's democratic, but there is something that is wrong. And they are very sensitive to that. And then last thing, for instance, yesterday, a good professors of 45, 50 years old, very good professors, they showed to me, you see, it was a chair like the grandmother chair there, very old, very ugly. There, they put, especially the students, in the middle of the hall. No? You will see, very ugly things. And they don't understand the thing, that this is a contestation. This is like, is art povero, no? No, they say, you see, we are teaching people with this vast taste. They say, but you don't understand absolutely anything. There is no communication. The students, they are trying to show that they don't care about the high architecture, they want the real architecture, and sometimes is this very old thing, and they put there, and then the reaction of the professors is that they don't accept the people that put this chair here is because it's ignorant people. They say, no, yes, you are the ignorant. You don't understand absolutely nothing. They are the clever people. We are teaching very clever people able to put this thing in mid as a declaration of war. No, I declare war to architects. I put here. You will see. And then they feel like this is some kind of a stupid thing, a bad taste. Very, very ugly things that is incredible. They don't understand the message. The message is not that. The message is, I don't care for Le Corbusier, all of these big professors. I don't care. I want to have a free teaching, and then I want to select the way I can go there. I don't want only one way, different ways. And this is new for the school now. I know that in some schools in the United States, in Missouri or that, I have some examples older, that they have this kind of reactions. We want to enter in art, for instance, not only the computer. There are some reactions, but now this is for Barcelona is the first time. Okay, not sure. You want to participate?
Yes, I was thinking that about when you were speaking. The project in Paris is the really opposite about participating democracy. Because, for instance, in Paris, the concertation, how do you say the concertation? With populations is a kind of decision of authority decision, because you have 8 different groups of persons, including the inhabitants, but the decision is taken by the state, and that is a problem. In Portugal, for instance, I was also in the consultation process, and is a little more. It's a little more not so authority, yeah. But in this project was quite like a war, you see. Yeah, between different partners, and I was very happy that in United States you have another way of very local, but
yeah, very local. Well, I was wondering, Isabel, when you were presenting, if you had to just leave it out for time, but when you were going to talk about who lives there in that quarter, in that area, yeah. If you were going to talk about who lives there and what role are they playing in this?
Yes, but I did
it's
that
already
time.
built.
Yes, it's already decided.
Yeah.
Even it's not built totally. But maybe there is some questions.
Yes.
Okay, if I want to implement some of your ideas back home, I would find this difficulty. How would I convince the schools to let the children spend all this time actually understanding tools of design and then thinking of problems and then presenting it in drawings and then meeting officials and talking to them? That consumes plenty of time, and that would take them out of their curriculum or their daily activities inside school? Do you do it in summertime or do you do it in the actual school time? How are you able to do that?
We do it in the actual school time. And what country are you working in?
Egypt.
In Egypt. Okay. So you have probably a national curriculum?
Yes.
Okay. In the United States, the school curricula, school control is very local. So every school district has its own school board, and which is really makes a major decision, and they're locally elected people who manage the school. So our students have to pass national tests. But they do have freedom in terms of how they organize, how a teacher organizes the program for the students to learn the skills that they need to pass the national tests. And the argument is that we have a concept, the environment as an integrating context, that you can use the local environment, and we call it also place-based education. You can use the local environment to teach about everything, because the students that I was showing, they're learning technology of building, they're learning measurements, they're learning scale, they're doing writing, they're doing, speaking, they're reading and doing research on these different, on these design processes. And of course they're doing art. So they are working in the different areas of the curriculum. They can certainly, you can integrate physics into it, of course. And so they're learning across subject areas. But it's not controlled like you have to be doing, everyone has to be doing math at 9:15 in the morning and then reading at 10:30. We don't have that kind of control.
Okay. Thank you.
That is very important. Yeah. Most of the countries are very far from that.
Very
Yeah.
fast,
Yeah.
Hello, I am architect from Poland, and my question is because which steps, when stage include concept of place, which prepare children to include prepared master plans, because of course we know that the best idea than the beginning, but I'm interested in which step include your concepts, use prepare master plan.
Yes. Well, what you saw there was, of course, a dialogue between the design students and their faculty, their supervising faculty, and then the students in the schools. And so the students in the schools generated general ideas of like what we want to see here. So like the low-rise courtyard housing that's open on one side, or are a lot of pathways for running and biking and walking, or an edible landscape, or general ideas like that. And then it goes to the design students to create their different suggested master plans, and then the children critique that.
But because, for example, I am working in Environmental University and Life in Wrocław, Institute Landscape Architecture, and we very often use similar tools during workshop with design students. But I'm interested in that this concept can be used in master plan, official master plan.
Okay.
And where, when?
Yes. Well, then all of these ideas are fed. So we have in that for example, the Great Green Neighborhoods Project, it was actually on the university grounds, and it was graduate student housing area. So the university architect and his department was involved. The city also, though, had its goals, its vision that they wanted the university to subscribe to. And so the city, the community planning office was also involved because it intersected with the city, and so there were certain requirements from the community planning department as well. So the official master plan was then created by the university Office of Architecture and then reviewed by community planning. But as I said, what's become very important to us is that they need to be able to show that they have integrated some of the ideas that have been developed through this long process of working with the schools.
In relation to your question, that's a very political question. Then, yeah, but in the question, the exact question, they will say, well, how this is implemented after in the professional master plan. That is, it's a very, it depends, each country, its place, etc. Here there is 50 friendly cities, friend of children. In Spain there is 100. And I participate in the process. But after 3 years, I knew that they don't implement nothing, absolutely nothing. Then I retired from the program. I like UNICEF, I like Rocher-Hart, but I don't agree that they make this just to play with children and participation. At the moment you say, well, now a law of toxic air, toxic air, don't touch that, no. Or the site of the sidewalks, no, sidewalk, this is politically controlled. Then I say, this is useless then. Then this is in this program. But in each situation, university and local, then it depends, because here also has very good examples that has been possible in this municipality. We make a contract with the university, and then this has been possible. They implement things through research, no? But this, in each case, this in Catalonia, in each case is a fight. Because you need to fight with everything, because they are not used to do that. The city hall and the municipalities in Catalonia, never they work with the university, never. Then when they work with the university, they need to be convinced that really this can be implemented, that this practically can be implemented. With the schools, the same. And then this depends a lot about the city hall, the mayor, if it works, works. If it doesn't work, not work. Because even the secretary of the city hall says, I know that this is wrong. No? Say, well, but you have here the law, no? The registration property of the land. And the secretary says, no, I know more than you, because you are a professor of the university, but you know. And then you need to fight everything to implement. But this is just a problem of loyalty, of local loyalty. It's not, in relation, the law is not against that. The law, you can, it's just the consultation. Yes. Of course, it's different in each city, it's different in each country, and like we say, Egypt, the difference of overall law of education, state education, and the local, the difference is incredible, because of course here we are not in the level of that they have in Egypt, and not we are in the middle now here in Catalonia. In Catalonia there is a Catalan law, but we can change the law, we can also manipulate, we can teach by projects, and then you make a project and you make that. Yeah. Here we are just, but each time it's an effort, because there is no tradition here. I don't know in Poland, but here, tradition of working a small city with university, here there is no tradition of that. This is very new. The city hall says, now the university is here, but this is very strange. Never has been here. No? Now is interested in the university. How in 200 years nobody, and now it's very strange that some professors are interested with this village. The first reaction is to say, take care, because this is dangerous. And then, if they accept you, then you can have a strong influence in master plan. But this is after. In Switzerland, they have much more tradition. The architects is Nazi, has worked with a lot of small villages in Switzerland, and has no problem. But this Nazi is each day in the tavern taking wine with the users. And then is one user more in the villages in Switzerland is Nazi. And it's very good architect. That is the tradition. The tradition in this case is very important. I don't know in Poland if it's possible to enter as a normal thing. It's very normal, but why not to make this? It's not strange, but it's a tradition.
Yeah. I have the sensation that the sustainable development will have to obligate us to change of point of view. Because and go more with this consultation with different kinds of peoples, because otherwise I don't think it's possible sustainable. No, I don't think so.
Could you say more about that, Isabel? Why don't you think it's possible without the consultation?
Because sustainability political has you have to deals with is why I began with the novel manifest about sensitive roles. These sensitive roles has exige an engagement of the populations and of all scales of the city. And is why this sustainable durability is very difficult to apply, because our societies in Europe are quite, maybe in North Europe is different, I don't know. But in the South countries is really the political decisions and the local persons, the local habitants don't have word with the decisions where they live. That is really a problem. Yeah. And yeah.
Well, regarding those partnerships, when we were growing up in cities, the revival in countries around the world, every partnership was different. Yeah. And we spent a lot of time, I had an operating principle that I actually borrowed it from a child ombudsperson in New Zealand. You bang your head on every door until you find the ones that open. And it is like that process. You really are just, you banging heads. It's a difficult process. But then there are the people who open the door and want to work with you. And then those are the partnerships you form.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask to Professor Chaula, first of all, it's a wonderful work what you did with the children. I work with children too, and I asked myself about the spontaneous representation of their space, of their city, of their towns by these children through drawings, through narrations. Sometimes in my work, I feel it's a sort of mixture between what do they see, what do they feel, and the representation of their parents, of their media systems. Most of the time, these children look a lot, watch a lot of television, they are involved in the media system. How can you, just because you are a psychologist, go so deep inside their perception of space to find out something new about the space? Just to make you an example, an Italian architect, Bruno Munari, who worked with children, said, beware when you put a sheet of paper in front of the children. They start drawing for the usual things, a home, a tree, and everybody draws the same because they've got a pattern from their families, from their social values. Try to find a new solution to try to find out something different that can create something that break our mind about the space. How did you had such good results?
Okay. Well, we're very site-based, so we never. We would not put a piece of paper in front of the children and say, just, draw whatever you want. Even the drawings I showed you when I was showing you Kevin Lynch's methods, those were, that was actually a self-built settlement in India. Those were the children's actual places. They were drawing the places they knew. And then you see what's important to them in the places they know. So we're really very specific to physical sites. And I think when you have to respond to the physical site, we want our design students to do that, and they often don't. And the children are doing that too. So it's typical to spend an entire semester, that means from August until late November, early December, they're working on this project. So they will go make site visits. They study maps. Like that little girl you saw sitting in the creek, that was during actually they were doing some creek monitoring, and they were actually studying the creek and the biodiversity that grew along it, and learning about the creek ecology. And I think when you really get grounded in a specific place through this very sensory process, and then that's what the ideas come out of, then I think that's where really new ideas come, really viable new ideas come for everybody, whether we're a design professional or a child.
Yeah, yes. In relation to that, they say innovation is not by out of blue, it's out of work. No, when he said it's not that if the children now I do that without no innovation, but the design is the same. The designer want to the big designer. He want to innovate. He needs to work, and what he said that digging deeply in the qualities of the place and the experience of the place is one way to obtain innovation, sure. Also, another way to take innovation for me is to share the values with other, in between children. No? Not my values, the values of the other children, and interchange values. You need to dig also. It's the same, but this is the same in children and in designers. Yes. It's the same. To teach designers in a very superficial way means that they are not inside the project. They are just looking there, observe, but they are not immersed. No? It's very nice, the Jean Nouvel explanation he says, no? Not to be distant from the place, to be inside the place. Jean Nouvel. Immersed. Jean Nouvel, not the children. No. Jean Nouvel himself, he says that to be distant is to make the typical urban planning that you are not inside. But if you are inside the planning is not the same, it's another one. Even Jean Nouvel defends that it could be, that it should be suspicious not do that. But because he wants to be also in as a person inside, as a group, as a family, as an institution. No? Mm-hmm. Well, that's it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting juxtaposition between the two lectures of Luis and Isabel, and certainly it's an important point of being immersed inside, as long as you're not drowning in it. I mean, you have to be outside also, right? Which is in fact, there's a point that Isabel was making of having people engaged. Your point in terms of sustainability also, that it needs to be culturally and socially sustainable as well in order to work. And I think that point links to another point that you were making, Isabel, about the urban project. Because there is a very basic difference between the urban plan and the urban project. And I think the urban plan is not immersed, but the urban project is. It's the point of immersion, it's the point of agency, it's the point of actually doing something, because a plan is not doing anything, it's just mapping things. But actually doing things happens not according to plan, but according to project. Did I lose? No. So I think that's sort of a very interesting link between The Girl in the River and Jean Nouvel.
But I think then that goes back to the question that Isabel, you said you're pursuing of how do you keep, in a sense, the theory and, let's say, design theory represented in a plan, how do you keep it responsive to the lived experience, to the project?
Yeah. What interests me in the participation, in my participation of this project, I work for 20 years, as I said, with a person who works, who understands very well morphodynamic semiotics, and who try during all this time to apply what are the internal dynamics of this place. And the Salpêtrière, as I explained, is it's like an attractor, very strong, it's a kind of vortex who turns around, and a very difficult island to resolve. And was very interesting in this project was very important to articulate all the decisions. Was the first time in the history of the project that everybody was trying to understand, because why we can't articulate it, the station and this hospital, why there is so bizarre, strange buildings and things, and why we can know doing links with the river, and is why I began with sensitive rules of Nouvelle, who are expressed in this project. And I think here, what we try to show during this intervention in Paris, with very symbolic place, is the last piece of land who is free, and the city is very symbolic, and all this stuff. And was quite interesting to see how the urban project can deal with the different domains, not like a milkshake, but something who are emerged and linked for inside. Yeah, what's that I was trying to explain. Yeah.
Okay. Last question. Last question.
Yes, you were presenting two projects in front of the train station. One that had a large building, and then the plaza or the garden, and one that didn't have this large building in front of the existing train station. So I couldn't follow exactly which one was your preference, or both of them were equally problematic. One was by Jean Nouvel.
C'est le même projet. Là, c'était des différents projets. Non.
You know, this is a very huge project. Fortunately, we don't have the scheme.
It's difficult. No.
But you know, there is a big piece of city, and the articulation between the station and the hospital and the square are the same project of Nouvelle and Dutiol. And this, the question, the urbanistic question, was the articulation, you know. they want to win the project in architectural, but they didn't win because they prefer to have an international conquest for solution. But the interesting of this project was that they could organize all the quarter as a whole. Yeah, and this is a lucky thing.
Okay. Okay, well, now we finish for the morning. Then remember 3 o'clock at the school, and the School of Architecture. 3 o'clock we'll start the 3 sessions, simultaneous sessions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.